I'm Marion Morgan from SAP Product Marketing, and I'm thrilled to introduce our speaker for today's session, Thaija Dickerson of Constellation Brands. Thaija is a trailblazer in contracts, procurement, and technology, and author of the book 10X Contract Value, Revolutionizing Business Agreements. At Constellation Brands, she heads technology and digital readiness for the Procurement Center of Excellence, and she leads initiatives to boost company performance through cutting-edge solutions. She's known for her people-first approach, which was the key to Constellation Brands' launch of SAP Ariba Guided Sourcing. By putting users at the heart of change, she was able to maximize adoption and revolutionize the sourcing experience. So today, she's going to share highlights about that journey with a special focus on the change management process her team used to drive success. And then at the end, we'll have a few minutes for questions. So let's give her a warm welcome.
Good morning, everyone. I'm going to move this slightly out of the way, but good morning, everyone. I have to tell you, I'm very excited to be here today, really seeing all of the innovation that was in the keynote about Joule and all of the changes that are happening with SAP, honestly, is very exciting. But I want to kind of take a moment to take a step back. Okay, step back very quickly. There we go. And I want you to think about the first time you actually saw the iPhone. Now, the iPhone was actually introduced in 2007, so it's been a while. And the reason why I ask you to think about the iPhone is because when you first saw the iPhone, it was very innovative and it was sleek. But did you really think that it would really transform the way that you lived and worked? Most of us didn't, right? We thought that it was just a tool, but it really impacted the way that we worked and lived. And by 2015, almost a decade after the iPhone was introduced, did it become part of our daily lives. And I make that note because these tools are innovative, but it's just a tool. You really have to focus on the people for adoption and integration for it to be successful in the way that it impacts their lives. And we really brought that mindset in the way that we implemented Ariba Guided Sourcing into Constellation Brands, focusing on 3 key areas. We focused on our people, our leadership, and our suppliers in order to make the technology successful in the implementation. A little bit about Constellation Brands. We're probably one of your favorite brands, even if you don't know it. We are known for our iconic names such as Modelo, Miomi, Kim Crawford, High West. But what really stands behind our brands is our dedication to innovation and operational excellence, which is what we also executed when we pushed out Ariba Guided Sourcing to our teams. Now, just to give a little bit of landscape, often we get the question of why choose Ariba Guided Sourcing as your RFP or your sourcing tool. So a little bit on our landscape. Pretty much, probably like many of you, our procurement teams have been very busy over the last few years, especially with the increasing demands from our companies and meeting objectives. Our company has been additionally has had the additional layer of complexity by having multiple tools integrated among our team. We've actually implemented a total of 4 or 5 big tools in the last few years, one of them being Ariba Guided Sourcing. Now, prior to Ariba Guided Sourcing, we were using a siloed tool that was not only inefficient in the way that it was used. It was honestly very similar to using Excel spreadsheets via email. It was siloed, disconnected from any other tool that we had, and it didn't offer sourcing efficiency or any of the advanced features that you would expect from a sourcing tool. So we have a broader vision of creating a procurement technology ecosystem where not only do our tools talk within the systems, but our data is integrated as well. So with this tool being siloed, it didn't really meet what our business needs were. But we happened to be a little bit lucky. We already had Ariba Guided Sourcing in our toolkit, and so we made the decision to implement Ariba Guided Sourcing. So Ariba is just a tool, like I mentioned with the iPhone. When you implement a tool, in order to get successful adoption, you really have to focus on the people. So we took a people-first approach. We went around to our different categories. We do have a pretty large footprint in both US and Mexico with our procurement team. So we met with the different categories, wanted to know exactly what their needs are, what their challenges were. So we used all of those insights in the way that we designed, configured, and built out a roadmap for Ariba Guided Sourcing. The second layer of that is not just designing the tool. You need to have influencers to also roll out the implementation of the tool. So when anytime you have a large change within organizations, you generally have certain leaders within your teams that people look to when there is change, with how to manage the change, how to be supported through the change. So we took that mindset and built what we call the champion circle. Now, this champion circle are leaders amongst our different category teams represented in the different geographies. Now, these individuals came together and we kicked things off with a super user training in Chicago. Now, this was important to really have everyone together because it would allow us to have a unified front in the way that we were rolling out the tool to the broader team. Now, I do have a star over one of the individuals in the left picture, and that is our Ariba account manager, Joseph Gelati. Close? Okay. Joseph Gelati, and he was there during our entire super user training, and this really did two things. It demonstrated that Ariba had a unified support of our vision to successfully implement the solution, but he was also able to help us troubleshoot and answer questions from our champions from an SAP Ariba point of view. Now, to add a layer of well, let me go back a little bit. The way that we did the super user training was kind of a 80-20 split. 20% of the training was on the content of the solution, and 80% of it was all hands-on and interactive. Now, many times what you'll have with new technologies is your people will push back and say, well, the tool is going to make my job more difficult or more complex, or is going to add more layers to what I'm already doing. So in order to help our champions be able to mitigate that bottleneck with their teams, we actually hosted a competition. We hosted a very short competition where everyone had to create, publish an RFP event, and then respond to the RFP event as a supplier. Now, this allowed them to be able to see each big function of the RFP process. But what we were also able to really unify the team in seeing that it only took 10 to 11 minutes to go through these big processes. And so that essentially would help them be able to encourage their team that there is going to be a incremental time addition to the beginning of building out the RFP, but the back end is where you will see all the value in the analysis, in the awarding, and then being able to collaborate all in one tool. Now, to also add a level of camaraderie within our team, we actually had these t-shirts made in both English and in Spanish that said Ariba eSourcing Champion because freaking awesome is not an official job title. Now, this is just, a little way that we were encouraging the team to maintain their leadership and build out influence within their team by being a unified front for this implementation. The next pillar for us is recognition and leadership. So when you go into change management, if you do not recognize the individuals that are really part of the transformation and the influence of your implementation and having the support of your leadership, it doesn't get the visibility that is needed to keep that change sustainable. So we made sure that we had the support of our leadership as part of this. And I want to just highlight just one event that we had, and this was actually at the end of our fiscal year. At the end of our fiscal year, we had a procurement quarterly town hall where our champions were highlighted and our top contributors were awarded because of what they had did in only the 7-month stint that we had for the Ariba implementation at that time. Now, I think what made this event very special is that not only was it in front of our CPO, but our CIO and our CEO happened to be at that event at the same time. So 2 things happened there. Not only did we see that procurement has a more significant role to our leadership team, but we were also able to get that visibility for our team for their efforts in the Ariba Guided Sourcing transformation. The third pillar, and probably one of the most significant ones, is our suppliers. We focus on our suppliers as well. Many times you can roll out a tool and only focus on the internal personnel that are impacted by the tool. But we understood that our suppliers would be just as impacted or even more because of this changing in the way that we did our RFP process. So not only did we create documentation, we did demonstrations. Honestly, for some of our largest RFPs that we rolled out, our teams actually recorded a demonstration of how to actually respond for that particular event from a supplier's perspective. So they were able to see exactly what they needed to do in order to respond to the event. But to add another layer, we also surveyed our suppliers. We wanted to get their actual feedback on the process. And our results honestly speak for themselves. We pretty much got high results on their engagement with the tool. We were able to get feedback that we were able to incorporate into best practices and then to leverage to build out our roadmap even further. Now, I'll be honest, I think the first time I was introduced to Ariba Sourcing, Classic Sourcing, was back in 2012. So I do have a history with Classic Sourcing. And I will tell you that the tool had some limitations, right? And we wanted to make sure that this tool, when we rolled it out to our teams, could handle the complexities and the volumes that we have in our RFP processes. So honestly, we tried to break it a little bit. We rolled out our largest, most complex RFPs first when we implemented the tool. And honestly, we did pretty well. I would say at the end of 1 year, we hit our anniversary with Ariba Guided Sourcing in September. Of our $1.3 billion in managed spend identified for sourcing, 67% of that was actually pushed through or is targeted for Ariba. Now, again, this is in a space where it's all people driven. There's no compliance requirements, and honestly, that is going to be the next layer to get even more adoption with the tool. But we have had almost all of our categories go through the Ariba Guided Sourcing tool at this point. But our vision really doesn't stop there. Our roadmap continues. We understand that we're only a year into Ariba Guided Sourcing, and we'll be further developing our Ariba sourcing tool with more category-specific intake forms, category-specific workflows, and also templates that are standardized and customized to really facilitate more of our activity through the RFP tool. Now, all of this is part of a broader vision. The workflow that you see here is just one of our workflows in procurement, but it covers everything from source to pay. And the way that we envision our solution is Ariba Guided Sourcing, going into an external tool for contract lifecycle management, and coming back into Ariba compliance so that way we can then connect our contracts and our sourcing activity to buying and invoicing through guided buying. So I would say that honestly, comparing classic sourcing to guided sourcing, Ariba Guided Sourcing is a very, very powerful tool, but whether or not it ends up as software or shelfware to your organization is completely up to you. Successful adoption of any tool is really going to be in the hands of how you manage change and integration of the tool within your teams. Now, I do have on the right side of the screen the technology hype cycle and life cycle. And I share that because when you're implementing technology, it can often seem like a roller coaster. There's a lot of anticipation for it to happen. Everyone seems to be on board. And then there seems to be this dip, right? The dip can include performance. It can include just the adoption around the tool, but there is going to be a dip. What I will say is that even with the iPhone, I keep bringing up the iPhone, there is always a dip in terms of adoption, but embrace the dip because you really have control over the dip. And that control is around change management and how you focus on the people when you're implementing the tool. And if you do that, you can have a much more minimized dip and a more maximized way of your tool as being adopted with your team. So I will say that people make the technology. Technology is amazing. We're seeing a lot of innovation just here with SAP. There's so much that is happening. But technology is nothing without the people. People empower and activate all of the value that comes out of technology. So my challenge for you today would be to consider how you can make your technology strategy more people-centric, more focused on how your people can integrate and adopt this tool and any other SAP Ariba tool, any technology into their jobs to make it more efficient. I think that is probably it for me. I want to open the floor if you have any questions at this point. Hi.
What was the competition when you rolled out guided sourcing? You said that you hosted a competition.
The competition was amongst the champions.
What was the competition?
The competition was so the question is, I'm supposed to repeat the question. Sure. What was the competition that we had with the champion circle? It was for them to create, publish, and respond to the event as a supplier.
What was who won, like, what was the prize, I guess?
I won't share too much on the prize, but I will say that I believe that procurement professionals have this innate competitive nature. So even without the prize, to be able to say that they were first, they were second or third, that was just within that bandwidth to share those bragging rights.
Timeline based. I got you.
Yeah.
Who is in charge of making your templates per category? Who's the owner of that?
So right now, I am managing that for our team. So that's why we do have an approach that is going to be continued develop when we bring someone that can fully support building it out more standardized and customized templates for our team.
So it's not the procurement team that's building the templates?
No, it is procurement. So in my role for technology and digital readiness, it's within our procurement center of excellence. And we support our team in building out best practices and templates for them to utilize.
Hi. I was the process owner for just requisition to pay, and I just recently had my scope expanded to source to contract as well. We implemented Ariba Guided Sourcing about 1.5 years ago. And the largest complaint I have from our sourcing people is they can't stand using it because it takes them, quote unquote, hours to create and launch an event. You mentioned 10 minutes. So I need to know, like, was our implementation partner just like really bad at putting this together? Or are my people just complaining about something that really doesn't exist and it's just, they just don't understand what they're supposed to be doing?
So I think there's two parts, right? So when you actually get to using the tool, you can copy events and really duplicate things. If you have a sourcing template library, all of those efficiencies make that process of building out an event very easy. But I always tell people, and we actually provided additional what we call white glove support in the initial event that our teams were rolling out. It does take a little bit of time to take what you have existing today if there's not much standardization amongst your teams, right? So everyone has their own special template. You can use the smart AI to kind of drop the template in, but honestly, you're gonna have to spend a little bit of time building out that first RFP. What I will say is that most procurement team members don't have 5 different RFP templates. They may have 1 or 2 that they really like, and if they get those built into the library, it's pretty much plug and play. They just grab the template, build in whatever specifics for that particular event, and then they can then offload it. But it is all part of the change management and training around how you implement it. Challenge them back, but I would say build the support that they need. If you can build the templates in there, do that. If you can provide additional support when they're doing their initial RFPs, it makes that process a lot easier because then they spend less time focused on that front end and then they see the back end. When, for example, when we had our transportation RFP, when we had about 200 suppliers, they were able to manage all of that within the one interface instead of having to manage multiple Excel spreadsheets. So, thank you for your question.
So I have a question. We're moving from classic sourcing to guided sourcing, fun stuff. But our question is this, because we are a team of 2. We administrate the whole entire system, procure to pay, all 6 modules. We need help from our actual true procurement personnel to help us determine what the standardized templates look like. Can you comment a bit about that? Because we shouldn't be building, based on our knowledge, not that we don't have a lot, what they want. So that's where we're having a little struggles at right now.
So I think that's where we leverage the group that I mentioned, our champion circle. So we have a specific dedicated person from each of one of our categories that can be the voice of their category. This is what our categories generally need. We actually did a activity where we pulled in all of the RFP templates that our teams use that they wanted us to essentially customize and build into the solution to make their jobs easier. But I would say if you're able to create a group of influencers to support the change, they can be the ones that say, hey, as a collective group, we think that these 3 templates work for our entire team, and then we just need to make these other customizations based on our needs. You're welcome.
Hi, quick question. So you mentioned the source to contract process. For direct, I'm assuming it's pretty straightforward, but for indirect, can you define the process of how your business stakeholders engage with procurement in your organization?
So, I'm sorry, could you repeat that one more time?
Like, what's the process for your business stakeholders to engage with your organization when it comes to the indirect procurement?
So that's one of the parts that's in our roadmap to further build out, where we have category specific. So for indirect, built as part of the request process, where the business has an intake request where they can complete, and then it can essentially flip over to guided sourcing for them to then run into a sourcing request. So that's one of the next spaces for our roadmap development. You're welcome.
So, question over here. So you're a year in now, and the feedback from the procurement team, are you seeing that they're finding the analysis and award scenarios sufficient, or are they exporting it and just doing all their analysis in Excel?
So it depends. I would say with an RFP where you have about 10 suppliers, 15 suppliers, the interface works wonderful for just doing that analysis inside the tool. But when you get over that 15, that's a lot of data to squeeze into one user interface. So at that point, we do see our users then export the data out to do their analysis. But most RFPs, you're not seeing, 15 plus vendors invited.
How many line items typically are in the RFPs?
So like I mentioned, it can range, right? Some you can have 2 or 3 because of the size of those items, where again, transportation, you can have thousands of lines, right? And like I mentioned in classic sourcing, if you tried to roll out thousands of lines in classic, it did something funny, it would lock up, you would have to refresh your screen, and then you'll call Ariba and they just say, you should probably just run that manually. So I see you're laughing over there because but that is not the case guided sourcing actually handles a lot of volume. We haven't found the max yet, but I will continue to push it, and hopefully next year I can tell you whether or not we've met that max. So,
Thank you.
you're welcome. Oh, Marion, I think gentleman here. Oh.
How do you integrate the results of your sourcing with your other
I'm
systems?
so sorry, I was looking at that microphone.
Did you hear my question? Like, how do you integrate with your other systems after you've got a result of your sourcing event?
So after sourcing, then it integrates into our contract lifecycle management solution. So the sourcing event gets awarded, then it goes into contract lifecycle management to create a contract or amendment if that is needed for that particular supplier. And then once that's completed, it goes back into Ariba contract compliance. So then that level of commercial detail is then available for our PO and invoicing side. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Thank you very much for maybe sharing your experiences from moving to classic to guided sourcing, right? So we are also maybe in the same path. Mm-hmm. Maybe we are trying to move to guided sourcing for last 1 year. The one thing which we want to understand from you is from the change management perspective, right? So we are using classic for last 5 years, right? And then we are trying to move to the guided sourcing. SAP always says that it's very intuitive, maybe very less change management is required, so that's what we are hearing. Maybe we would like to understand from you, maybe what are the things which you took care during the change management, what are the different kind of trainings which you did, and then maybe what kind of hypercare support which you did after you moved to the guided sourcing. Maybe if you can share, that will be great.
No, definitely. So I'm not sure if I'll get in trouble for saying this. But when we implemented Ariba Guided Sourcing, we had many users that were familiar with classic sourcing. Yeah. So we actually implemented both tools, and that allowed our users to essentially toggle in between classic and sourcing, and that was helpful, right, in the change management. I'll use one example. For teams, like you wanted to identify who was the team on the RFP, where that was very clear in classic sourcing because there was a tab. But in guided sourcing, there's this tiny little people icon at the top that your eye wouldn't catch unless you knew that it was there. And because they were able to toggle in between, it made it very easy for them to say, hey, okay, these are the team people, and then they could quickly ask someone else, okay, how do you do this in guided, and then identify that change. So that's how we essentially manage the initial change for the different interfaces. In terms of training, like I mentioned, we started with our super users, right? We know that we can't train everyone and they really get it. So we trained our super users to master the tool, and then they went out and trained their teams. So then they could train them on their category specific needs using the RFP templates or an event that was very specific to their team, so they actually could see it in motion and how that worked. We also are building additional training material where people can actually do an assessment and have just an individual visual on-demand training for guided sourcing as well.
Okay, thank you.
I think it's me next. Wasn't sure. That's here. When you were identifying the champions, did you guys drive identifying those people, or did you listen to other recommendations? I think where we struggle is we have sites all over the world, and the sites may recommend someone that, you know, corporately may not be the right fit to actually champion the system. Mm-hmm. How did you go about that?
Well, honestly, we have an amazing leadership team, and we went to our leadership team and asked them for their particular categories, who they thought was the change agent or influencer in their particular category. And we're not just using these champions just for Ariba Guided Sourcing. We're actually leveraging them with our other tools as well. So that's how we essentially identified our influencers.
And quick follow-up, mm-hmm. Were all your champions procurement-specific people, or did you go outside of procurement?
Right now, it's only procurement-specific people.
Okay. Mm-hmm. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for the great presentation. How did you measure success between classic and guided sourcing, and how long did it take you to achieve that success, the lead time?
I will tell you that we only trained our teams to use Ariba Guided Sourcing. Even though we built out Classic, we didn't train them on Classic. So if they knew it was there, they could toggle in between, but we didn't implement. So we didn't have Ariba Classic Sourcing as a tool prior to Guided Sourcing. And to be honest with you, I think Ariba turned off Classic for us at some point, so it was just not available for the team to leverage.
So what was the measures of success? Just to be clear, I missed.
So for measure of
Yeah, thank
success, not in between the tools, but measure success that we had was how many events from our overall sourcing scope actually went into the tool.
Thank you.
As a part of guided sourcing, do you also leverage full projects, or is it primarily events that you host through guided sourcing, or is there an aspect that you incorporate full projects in?
You mean like strategic projects?
So you've got the event, but then I guess from a classic sourcing perspective, you've got the workspace with the WSID, right? So do you, with all the events that you host, are those just individual, quote unquote, quick projects that are RFXs, or do you also, as a part of guided sourcing, leverage the full project workspace?
Yes, so we have our full project workspace, so we do full projects and those single projects. So we do tactical and strategic within the tool.
I got you.
I think we need to wrap up. Okay, one more question, and then we'll close.
Hi. So how did you do the intake process? Like, did you integrate, did you do any other sourcing request? You get into the guided sourcing, or did you use any other system and integrate with guided sourcing?
So we're actually building that out now as far as the intake, but right now our teams are still doing the manual intake with their teams, with the business teams through emails or Excel spreadsheets, and then building that into the Ariba Guided Sourcing. But that is a plan for us to use forms, Ariba forms, or there's like a intake request where our business partners can complete that, and then it can be flipped over into Ariba Guided Sourcing.
All right. Thank you so much, Ty. That was a wonderful presentation.
Thank you.